Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
Welcome back, everybody. Appreciate you being here, and important stuff we're going to talk about today. I personally feel that this is the baseline, the GPS for your whole life when it comes to relationships. And essentially what that is things that were done to you, for you, call it those traumas that you experienced very early in life, really chart the course for the way you handle relationships in your adult life. And we're going to dig deep into that today. We've skimmed it in the past, but let's go a layer deeper because it's so important. And he helps people with that all the time, navigate through that. He's an amazing life coach, and he's Andrew Dale, and he's back on the program. Andrew, welcome. How you doing?
I'm great, thank you, Steve. How are you going?
Doing great, doing fantastic. And it really is something that we've centered on in the past before, in that those things that happened in our lives, many times we had no control over, or when we were a kid, call it 2, 3, 5, 7, 8, whatever years old. Those things that we heard really do chart the course for the future of how we deal with our relationships, right?
Yes, absolutely. And it goes all the way through through our lives as well. It's one person I like to talk about is actually my mum, and a couple of reasons for that is, number one, she passed a couple of years ago now, but she was 89 when she passed, and her issues that she grew up with, the Great Depression, things like that, are very similar to what's going on now, but it just shows you that nothing changes. If you're thinking this is a year 2000 thing or a year 1970, we're talking 1930s, 1940s. The rules were the same, like if you had a whole lot of turmoil going on around you, that was going to color the rest of your life. And one of the stories I like to tell about Mum is when she was in the Great Depression. Australia had the Great Depression as well. That went all around the world. A lot of people don't know that. But she lived in country Australia, and people had to keep moving. They had nowhere to live, and they would come past her house each day, the families, and their family would feed another family, and then they would go off and find somewhere to sleep. And Mum learnt from that to have enough for yourself was greedy. You had to share everything you had. And it wasn't until she was about 84 when we dealt with that, sitting in a beautiful place in Austria looking at the mountains. And I went through it, and I actually said to her, if in Australia now or in America, same thing, if anyone wants to have a car, a nice house, can they do that? Can they get a job? Is it reasonable that everyone can look after themselves if they want to, if that's their goal in life? And she said, yeah. And I basically said to her, is it okay for you to keep some money now? Because we were never short of money, but there was never any savings. And Mum lived like that for years and years and years. And then after that, she'd had a very successful tennis career. And then at 87, she won the World Tennis Super Seniors in Florida. She won the doubles and the mixed doubles at 87 for the over 80. Yeah. And they played super tennis. That was amazing, watching these people on the courts. But, she'd won a lot of medals. She'd gone to Wimbledon when she was in her 20s. And, but one of the keys for her to really creating friendships around her, creating a social network, was breaking the back of that one belief, or those beliefs she'd had for nearly 80 years, for 75 years, 80 years, she'd held on to the belief that she had to share everything in her life. And, this is what I'm saying. People, younger people now have had a lot of trauma in the last 10 years. They're going to have to make sure that they're very much aware of, and the adults seeing their grandkids, be aware that the kids have been traumatized. They go to school and they don't know if there's going to be they're doing active shooter drills. That's going to stay with them unless we understand that, and we're going to have to understand our grandkids, and that's one of the traumas the grandkids are going to go through. So for ourselves, all of these, so that's a negative trauma. One of the positive traumas that we can end up with is say we're when we're kids. Someone was talking to me this about the other day. Their father was a doctor, and they'd stop at every major accident, but they'd say to the child, "Stay in the car or stay in the house. Stay away from the action. We don't need your help here. Stay away from the action." And part of that translates into, you don't have to step up. Someone else will do it for you. So while the father's being very generous and very safe for the child, they're actually causing a barrier that says you don't need to look after, you don't need to step into the action. You stand back and sit on the sidelines. We will take care of everything. And, in life, it's very rare that you can go through life with someone else taking care of everything for you. And it just, it means that it's much more difficult to take responsibility when times get tough. That's how that one translates. But there are all these type of things where different people, bullying's a big one. One of the ones with mum, I talk about mum a bit. She's got some YouTube videos, which is great. I can go back and listen to my mum give motivational speaking about her tennis, and while she plays tennis with her dog. But one of her things was she was bullied at school by one of the local wealthy kids. So that it was basically a family that was being aggressive towards her, and we talked about this. And she was a prefect at school, which is a position that's voted on by the kids. And once we got talking about it, then the other stories came up, and one of the stories was one of her friends at one of the reunions was talking to one of the teachers. And he'd said, "Yeah, I always thought Margaret would do really well in life, and that doesn't surprise me that she's doing what she's doing." And when Mum thought about this and we went through it, she thought she was the outcast at school, whereas she got voted in. So the majority of kids liked her, and it was causing her problems because that would cause part of the bullying. But the reality was more people liked her than didn't because she'd won the vote. The teachers, thought she was going to do amazing things with her life, but she'd forgotten these things. All she remembered was this family that was bullying her, instead of going back and getting it in perspective. We're not trying to cover things up. We're trying to get things in perspective, right? And the reality is, I like to talk about moments in time, which means that, you might have been bullied for 5 years by the same kid. That's one moment in time. But what other moments took place during those 5 years? Were you playing sport? Were you doing well at education? Did you have a great family life? Did you have good friends? And when we go back and we actually layer up all the good things that were going for you at that point, all of a sudden the bullying means it's just nothing. Even though you remember it, energetically, it's now nothing. Energetically, number one, you realize that allowing the person who was bullying you to have any input on your energy is just you giving your power away to someone that doesn't honor you. And so, you feel a little bit silly about it, and you should, from the point of view of you don't want to go back there. You never want to give someone the power over you if they haven't got the best of you at heart.
Now, bunch of thoughts here, Andrew. First of all, I think you said your mom passed a few years ago.
Yeah, just 2
Yeah.
years ago now.
Yeah, so did mine. She was the same exact age. So our moms
Oh, really?
they pretty much went through the same thing when we talk about, the Great Depression. And, for some people, that could be a challenge with abundance, where if your parents said continually, we don't have enough money, money doesn't grow on trees, we got to save, got to save. And then you have this thing about money where you're almost afraid or feel guilty to make more money. So that could be a trauma there that goes back to that. My mom was very overprotective, single mom, very overprotective. I found myself doing that to my kids until I realized
Exactly.
it. And like, it's a kind of a cliche. It's like, we turn into our parents. Well, I turned into my parents, and it came from a good place, but there was, when my kids were much younger, I look back and I was like, you were really overprotective on them. But then it got to a point where I was just like, I stopped it, corrected it. And it's like, why am I following you around, worried that you're going to fall and hit your head? If you do, it's okay.
Yeah.
You'll mend and you'll be back. You'll be okay. And the bullying thing, I was bullied as a kid, and it definitely made an impact on my life later in life until I confronted it and dealt with it. And like you said, and you said it perfectly, we don't just make those things go away. We just acknowledge them and put them into perspective, what they really were. But when you're a kid and you get bullied, it's a big deal. It makes a huge mark on you.
Yeah, and it's not. As I said, we look for the other things that were going on at the same time, because just trying to put something aside creates the vacuum. You've got to have something else to go into that vacuum to fill the void. It's sort of like, if you think of space, if a planet disappeared, it's not going to disappear. Something's going to go there. A vacuum will suck something in there. Well, the choice for us is, first of all, you decide what's going to replace that. And so you replace it with great memories or positive thoughts about yourself. Why was the bullying happening? Oh, the person was jealous. Oh, that means that I was actually better than them. Yeah, see?
Yeah.
And
this is interesting. I have to tell you, Andrew, I confronted all of that through hypnosis and, before we met. But I've never heard it said to look at the positive things that were going on around that time as well. And when I look at that time, the bullying wasn't good. And I'm talking, 8, right around there, and a period of years. But what was the good stuff going on? I had great satisfaction in drawing. I wanted to be a cartoonist back then, and also was interested in broadcasting as well. So all those things kind of overshadowed the bullying, took my attention away from them. But it's an interesting thought when you talk about going back to the trauma, but looking at all these things that surrounded it, and maybe a lot of those were a lot of good things. I always hear the word trauma, go back to that one moment, but there's other things to frame it, to put it all into perspective.
Yeah, you got to be careful going back and dwelling on a moment.
Yeah.
People can get really hurt doing that, and it's going to hurt a little bit to change. You're going to have to acknowledge that moment in time, but you don't have to. People talk about reliving it, and you shouldn't have to do that.
No.
And we've got to be. You've brought up a great point where you've got to acknowledge things, but you have to be grateful for what that person did for you. And for you, you may never have been drawing if it wasn't for the bullying. So if you have a look at that, my dad was abusive for years, and I would never have taken up sailing if it wasn't for my dad. I would have been playing football, playing cricket. He was the worst sideline dad in the world because he'd yell at me instead of the other team. But the sailing, I could sail all day and I couldn't hear him. So it sparked a lifelong obsession for me with sailing. I've sailed I sailed on Sydney Harbour. I sailed the Sydney Hobart Yacht Race. You know, I own my own little yacht there in South River. I sailed against world champions. I never would have done any of that, or
Wow.
possibly, if it wasn't for the fact that my dad was so noisy on the sideline that I had to find a solution. And yeah, so I was extremely lucky. I was also pretty crazy, which helped.
Yeah.
so my idea of taking up a sport is find something you can't do and do it anyway.
Well, not a lot of people do that, so I applaud you on that. I don't know if I would be that person to do that, as well.
Yeah,
But you're right about if you focus on just the trauma, it can potentially not be a great thing. It's better to look at all the other stuff. When I was hypnotized, looking at those moments,
sure.
I confronted myself as a child,
Yep,
and it was good. Like basically, you are there for him. You'll always be there for him. The adult
absolutely.
in me was always there after that hypnotherapy session for that child to help
Yeah.
move forward. But you're
And
right. There's a lot of pluses.
yeah, there's no right and wrong way to do things either. You know, it's what works for you, and that's, you know, finding someone to work with that that can crack the code for you. You know, so some people are great at it. Other people, you know, it just depends on you. And but yeah, being grateful for things. Gratitude's an amazing thing. I think we've talked about gratitude before.
Yep.
But being thankful for who you are, being, you know, nurturing that young child within you. You know, they need a hug sometimes. You know, and and no one's parents were perfect. And the one thing, you know, one of the big things that I figured out was they do the best job they can. You know, everyone does the best job they've been trained to do by generations. So your parents were trained by their parents, were trained by their parents. So what you're learning now could possibly be, you know, 150 years old. Something that, you know, you're learning, and that might be integrity, you know, or that might be taking your time, or it might be something really ridiculous. So that no one knows the reason for, but we do it anyway, you know. And but if you understand that you're being taught by generations, and it's up to you to decide which teachings you keep and which teachings you let go. And the reason for all of this is it's all your relationships in your life. It's your relationship with your parents, your kids, yourself, and your partners. And, you know, if you're finding that you're on several partners and they all end the same way with the same outcome, then, you know, going through and looking at what's happened in the past is essential. You know, what you learned off your parents. You know, the funniest memory from people is quite often the 2-year-old at the breakfast table or at the lunch table, whenever they had a meal with the family, and you get tremendous insights from that first memory. You know, and it's always like, you know, people. If you're talking to a 50-year-old, it's 48 years old, so it's a whole other lifetime before, but they can still remember clearly quite often what happened, what was going on around them, and especially, you know, the parents are new parents, so money is quite often tight. Not always. Sometimes there's arguments. Sometimes the parents are working all the time. You know, if you want to know why you're a workaholic, did your parents work all the time when you were 2? You know, and if both parents had 2 jobs, you're probably
Seriously.
working. Yeah.
Have you heard this? And I'm totally on your page there, Andrew, about it. We should just take that time to kind of focus back and even write down, what were my parents like? All those things. And then on a simplistic level, look and see the parallels, how you may be that way. Have you heard this, that if you think back to your first memory as a kid, usually that very first memory is usually a negative memory? I've often heard that, and I believe it's because our fight or flight system, we're programmed to fight. That's the thing that we remember, a negative memory. Have you heard that? When you think back, do you come up with your first memory as potentially being negative?
Um, because of the way, like I don't have many memories of my childhood, um, apart from sailing and football and things like that. I think I blacked it out, but we're not going there. But but it depends how you're going back there. If you're trying to remember, if you're going back there from a place of love, from a place of inquisitive, and you're just thinking what actually happened, let it come to me, then it's amazing. You get a real feel for what was happening at the breakfast tables, and you because you're not looking for something specifically. If you're searching for answers, if you're saying, look, I'm traumatized, I got to go and find where my trauma was, you'll find it.
Mm, yeah.
But so you have to be careful what you wish for. You got to be kind to yourself. Doesn't matter whether you got on with your parents or you didn't get on with your parents. There were probably times where you actually got on quite well, and if you go back there gently and you say, all right, well, I wonder what that was like, talk to your mum, talk to someone who knows or whatever. But go back there gently, go back there to find out what actually happened, because quite often what was a negative memory for us was actually a positive event. We just looked at it differently at the time, and
I don't have that. And I don't know. It wasn't like there was something, these were, call them accidents, but the very first memory I believe I had was around 2, and I was in an apartment and I was waving bye-bye and I fell standing on a radiator and cut my head open. And
okay.
And I remember my mom freaking out and running downstairs to the tenant downstairs in this complex. And, my son is bleeding. He was a dentist, and overhearing him say, "What do you want me to do? I'm a dentist. I can't help you." And my mother freaking out. And there was another time right around the same age where I got a really, really, really bad sunburn. And my mom being angry at my dad. They got divorced right around that time. But I don't have positive memories. I mean, I guess the one positive memory was sitting on a little car and moving it through that apartment because I liked it and it was fun. But I've often heard that, so I wonder if other people have heard that memories can be negative. Your first ones for a reason.
Yeah, and the funny part about that is you're looking at those as a negative memory. Here's a crazy story. Okay, so I'll keep it a little bit short for you. I was sitting in the desert in Western Australia, like a couple hundred miles from anywhere, on a road crew where I used to drive, support the road crew in a 4-wheel drive. I was in my 20s. It was a great job. We were literally out the desert supporting oil rigs in the desert. And out of the 6 guys that were there, as children, they put a garden fork straight through their foot. Believe it or not. And the 6th guy was crazy, so that was just as well. But I can still remember my mother looking up and going, no, as I put my garden fork, one of the big 4-prong garden forks?
A pitchfork. Right. Yes, the pitchfork. Yeah, right.
Right through my foot. And so to me, that's not a negative memory. That's just boys being boys.
Agreed. I totally agree. And with me, I call it a negative memory. It was an accident, but I remember it. It's like, why don't we remember the more positive things? Don't know. Maybe there's a reason for that.
But I think your mum, reacted from a point of her perspective, whereas my mum would have always gone, okay, off to the hospital, and we just would have got it fixed. Well, very country folk, and Yeah.
Exactly. And that goes back to what I said before. My mom, she was wonderful, but she was overprotective. So she probably overreacted. And then that's why I remember it. Has it impacted me? And then, those things, I don't know. I have to look at those. But it's funny how we talk about how those things chart the course for relationships. Because I know somebody who whose mom was had a lot of anxiety. This person, she had a lot of anxiety as well, passed on from maybe the mother, and says that she always attracts people in relationships, partners that have a lot of anxiety. So there's a potential there unless you confront that situation that's what you're going to bring to you. Sometimes I guess people are just gravitating because they feel comfortable because you have anxiety, you're anxious, and they do.
I heard a great little video. It was probably 1 minute video of Charlie Munger the other day, and someone was interviewing him, and he said, "Well, one of the great things in life is you find a partner that supports you, has their stuff together. You don't find someone to fix." And I'm going, what a great idea. I wonder why he's a billionaire. But it's such great advice. If you're constantly looking for someone to fix, that means that you're not ready to accept someone that is complete, which means you're probably not. It means you've probably got some work to do.
A billion percent, and you probably don't even know you're doing it.
Yeah. Oh, look, absolutely. But I was amazed that, he's a billionaire. You'd think he'd think different. No, he thinks exactly sensibly. It was the best advice I'd ever heard for anyone. And, you might not be there at the moment. So sometimes it's not the right time for you to jump into a relationship. Sometimes, we all have seasons, and maybe this season for you is the winter where you hibernate for a bit and go into spring where you bring yourself together and basically reborn. And that can be like, it can take a moment, it can take 6 months, it can take years, but it's important that you take the time to find out who you are, and it really doesn't take that long if you had the right help. But
exactly,
but find out who you are, find out the positive things about you, find out where you really want to be, and what you will and won't accept in a relationship from yourself as well. Put that down on the list. And if you find that you're badgering your partner until they're pulling their hair out all the time, maybe you need to work on that.
And you can't do it alone. So that's where you come in to help people help us analyze, where these things took place. The one thing I've learned from you today, Andrew, the way you work, you come from a picture of positivity. But it's realistic positivity, because anytime I hear anybody talk about those traumas, it's usually centered on a negative thing. You went through this and now you have to fix that because you're going to continue going through it in your relationships and in your life. You have a different spin on it where look at what you learned, the positive. Yeah, it messed you up. There's no doubt about that. You got to confront it. You got to deal with it. But look at those positive things that came about from that and learn from those as well. For you, if somebody wants to dig deeper into that kind of stuff, that's your wheelhouse. Your website is andrewjdale.com, right?
Yep, that's right. And if you go on there, you can have a look. I've got a few clients on there that you can find out, just listen to their videos. They're only short, and book in a free clarity session. I'd much prefer you get to know me a little bit and you unpack where you are to make sure that I'm the right person for you. So we do that for free. So just go on and you can book in there, and I'd love to speak to the audience. That would be great.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And you gave the word clarity session. That's what we need. We just need some clarity. Don't even call it a consultation, even though it is. Just get some clarity on your life. AndrewJDale.com. Andrew, always great having you on with us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Steve. Much appreciated. I love these conversations. We have
here.
great back and forth. It's
Absolutely. And even the parallels with our moms, that was kind of weird too. You don't know until you talk some more. But be well. We'll talk soon again. Okay.
All righty.
Thank you.
Care.
Are you looking for even more of the podcasts and hosts that you love? The Podcast Business News Network is proud to announce that you now have even more ways to listen live. Check out the MyTuner Radio, online radio box, and Simple Radio apps on iOS and Android, or find us online. Search for Business News Network on mytuner-radio.com, or search Podcast Business News Network on streama.com and onlineradiobox.com/US. Take your podcast on the go and don't miss a minute of the action.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
For nearly 2,000 severely injured veterans, everyday life has become filled with barriers.
Day-to-day simple tasks can become pretty daunting.
I have to carry my chair up 2 flights of steps or have somebody do it for me.
What scares me the most is just the falling.
When I'm struggling with my house, I think, to have that one great barrier just knocked down, it's crucial.
Home for Our Troops is a wonderful nonprofit that builds a
Mortgage-free, fully adaptive, handicap-accessible house. And there's no catch.
It'll be our very first home that we've ever owned.
This is a game changer.
This is where your life begins again.
We need you to join us in completing this important mission. Please visit hfotusa.org and help build homes and rebuild lives.
Because of you, everything's going to be okay.